So that is yes, probably, no, probably, and maybe to both.
I couldn't have done that.
The best we have seen on the furniture that we've examined, Peter's examined a whole mess, lives in New England and he's falling in all the time, has been to England and looked at hundreds of pieces. We haven't seen a consistent marking system such as you'd find, you know, the what do you call that?
Pig's tail.
The pig's tail and then the arrow, you know, which is a great system. We're doing all the styles with triangulation and all that. We just haven't seen it. There's one, the Savile stuff, maybe we might talk about later, which has a little indication. I use some of that system, Peter doesn't.
John has all these pens and markers and things, and he loves to write on stuff. But
I have a cousin who has a, you know, art
stationery store. So what I've done is carried that with a square across here, and then the bevel gauge across there, and then back to the square. So this is the top of the stool around the corner. And this is the apron that is going to fit in this mortise I haven't cut yet. I don't measure the height of this mortise. I just prick it from the apron like that. Doesn't matter if this mortise runs long. It makes no difference whatsoever. And likewise, I'll do the same thing with the stretcher. I carried around the line that determines the top of the stretcher, and I just lay it on there and bop the bottom line. They're not really done from a ruler. In fact, they're not done from a ruler, period. Not really done. And then back to that mortise gauge to mark out the width of the mortise. It's the same setting as the tenon. You get that? And now I'll make one more line at the top because the tenon does not come all the way to the top of the rail at the top of the stool. It's, I think, called a stepped tenon. It's not a haunched tenon. And what the 17th century guys called it, we have no idea. So, and that is just done by eye, not by measure. Very little, Peter, as you find out, is done by measure.
The top of the mortise, that dimension is important, particularly in the apron.
The top of the mortise is important?
Yes.
No, it isn't.
Yes.
Why? Why is that important?
Because that's going to determine whether you're going to get a level top on your stool.
No, that's the top of the stool and the top of the rail, not the top of the mortise.
Yeah, but the mortise is going to determine where the rail is. Or
no, it doesn't.
Well, let me put it this way: I will take him to lunch, and his mother said, you know, that if he takes his medications regularly, we're not going to have any trouble at all.
All right. Do you want me to do this now?
No, he's sulking. So
no.
Oh, pardon me, Peter.
All that matters is I've marked the top of the stool here, and that the top of the rail meets the line that determines the top of the stool. Where the mortise is and where the tenon is, I can have all kinds of slop in that mortise. That tenon can slide up and down in that mortise. As long as it slides up to meet that line, that's all that matters.
I am going to remain silent.
Yeah, that would be a first. Okay.
I took him into my home. I fed him.
So I guess I'm going to move down this end. And, you know, I came down here to Virginia where, you know, it's all this 18th century. I'm just a 17th century guy, and I trained with the little master. I'm, you know, fairly small, not a very big fellow. He's smaller. I meet Garland and Ted. It's big, massive people, and they got these huge holdfasts and these big benches and stuff. And it's like, I feel like I've gone to, like I've been making Smurf furniture and I've come down here to the big time. It's like, wow, everything is huge down here. So let's say that that's going to hold there. I think that might hold. Mm-hmm. Somewhere I have a chisel right here. This is a beautiful tool. Do you like the splits in the handle? I made that handle myself. It's made by, I don't mind telling you, Robert Sorby isn't in the house, is he? I had one of these chisels one day snap right here. And I put it in an envelope and wrote a nice letter to Sorby and mailed it over to England and said, you know, I broke one of your chisels and I was just wondering, why do you make it thinner there? Where you've got the metal here and you've got it there, but then you snick it down right there. I'm just curious, why did you change something that hadn't been changed for hundreds of years before that? They didn't answer my question, they just mailed me a new chisel. And I promptly broke their handle and put my hickory handle on there. And this one hasn't broken yet. I've had it for a long time. But I guess it's good enough. I just don't
Peter,
like
you're going to make a little noise, so I'm going to step out for that.
yeah, you run along. So what I'm going to do now is start to cut this mortise. And there are many ways to do this. Real reason John has stepped aside is he can't stand to watch me cut a mortise. And I have taken to cutting sort of a V-notch in the middle of the mortise and alternating those blows left and right to get down to the depth I need. And the green wood still, because of that moisture content, will cut out pretty easily. Just as we were describing, probably not emphasizing enough, is that the whole reason we make this stuff out of green wood is because it's easy, and we are weak and pathetic, and this stuff is just so simple. I occasionally will hit a really dry piece of wood, and I think, oh, this is what everybody's talking about. This stuff is really hard. But when it has a lot of moisture in it, it cuts up very nicely. And I'm sure Garland and Ted are going to show you different ways to cut a mortise and tenon, and everybody's going to get to the same place. So it really, there's more than one ways to skin a cat. Oops. When the world went wrong. I was telling these guys the other day, one of the men who taught me hand tool woodwork is a man named Daniel O'Hagan. And Daniel told me, anything you need, you can make it out of white oak or white pine. And I looked down and he was building a joint stool out of walnut. And, well, oak, the whole joint furniture in England and New England, oak was the primary timber for that for the 16th and most of the 17th century. By the 1680s, the really posh stuff is starting to shift over. You do see walnut used contemporaneously with the oak in England, not so much here in America. But it's when cabinet making really came to the forefront of the English tradition, which I would say probably begins in the 1680s, you know, give or take 10 years this way or that. I think the first person described as a cabinet maker in New England is in Boston about 1685 or so. And he's going to work in a whole different tradition, different techniques, different style, and often different timbers.
Sawn boards.
About which I know next to nothing.
May I make a few just brief comment?
No,
Peter?
we should probably just let it go.
Sawn boards, both sides parallel. Totally different from what you'll see in this craft.
Well, joiners know all about sawn boards because they build pine chests probably more often than they build oak chests.
And did the pine chests have mortise and tenons?
No. worked them. So now I'm coming down to the end of that, the bottom end of that mortise, and because of the canted shoulder on the apron, where am I? Yeah, this piece. This apron is kicked over like that. So the end of my mortise isn't plumb, it's undercut. So you have to sort of get in there and cut into the end grain. And again, I don't measure that with a bevel gauge or anything. I just eyeball it. I'd rather overdo it and be able to slide the piece in than to take a bunch of fussy time checking with the gauge. Likewise, at this end, it's angled in the same direction, which is easier at the top of the mortise than it is at the bottom. Because at the bottom of the mortise, you're undercutting the end grain. Here, you're just sort of sliding down it in a sloppy and casual manner. You can tell we don't take this stuff very seriously, but we like to do it. Till right before you break through. My stock is 2 inches thick, and I just do the depth. In this case, I've got a mortise cut on the other side, so I can break into that mortise, and that'll be fine. I just don't want to break all the way through the stile, mostly because this isn't my bench. And but you get the depth by practice. You want about 1.5 inches. And then your tenon will be about 1.25 inches long, certainly not more than 1 3/8 inches. But the depth usually comes from practice. What I'll tend to do is cut it, and when I think I'm done, I'll then check it with a ruler if I have to. Sometimes you'll find a high spot that needs correcting.
We have been privileged to look into the some 17th century mortises, and it's a rather outrageous scene at the bottom of the mortise, I can assure you. I mean, there's all just, frass, jagged places coming up. The ultimate issue is going to be stay away from the tenon. Stay away from the tenon, at least 1/4 inch.
I'm going to take this paring chisel and just shave those inside faces of the tenon a bit to make sure they don't protrude into the mortise, the inside faces of the mortise, excuse me, not the tenon. And,
now, mind you, his tenon has not been finished yet. He's going to finish the tenon to match the mortise.
So I think that's one. I have to do the other one to be able to build this stool.
And of course, we've seen on mortise chisels, but not 17th century mortise chisels, file marks showing depth.
Yeah,
that's a common thing you see. But the question is, and there are some 17th century mortise chisels that have been excavated. Jay Gaynor's written this gorgeous article in the latest Tools and Trades Journal. Really the whole history of tool making in the Western tradition from the 17th century. There's a lot of archaeological material which has been gotten here and in Tidewater in general. But I don't recall. Jay, are you here?
He's had the good sense.
No, he's counting the receipts. It's important. I mean, museums don't crawl on their kindness.
All right, I'm going to cut one more. We got 10 minutes till the break.
Okay.
I'll cut this. We'll bore the holes, and that'll be that.
Good.
So this is going to be very redundant, and if you have questions, Mr. John will take them for you.
It's wonderful that I'm short enough that I'm not blocking the screen. Isn't that nice? The Lord provides in mysterious ways. And somebody help me remember to ask Jay that question, that if on any of the archaeological material there's any indication of a depth mark. Now, of course, a lot of these things have been retrieved from underground, so whether the marks would be obvious or not is a good question.
Depth mark on what, John?
On the chisel for the mortise depth. I see it very often on 18th century chisels and 19th century chisels.
I don't remember seeing anything on any archaeological.
Oh, is that you, Jay?
No.
Oh. But you sounded like Jay. Would you sing for us, please? The thing about cabinet making is, do not get the idea that cabinet making evolved from English joinery. The English cabinet maker was a reformed joiner. And we think of crafts developing in an even, flowing way. Not necessarily true. Cabinet making, as we know it, had been practiced on the continent extensively. And I can't give you the times because I'm not an expert on that subject, but for at least 200 years. Albrecht Dührer's 1490 print of Melancholia. Remember the lady who's so sad and there's the plane and so forth. And right here is a 6-board dovetailed chest, just as clear as can be. Well, 6-board dovetailed chests weren't made in England until the 17th century. And when they were first made, they were probably made by immigrant craftsmen from the continent. Because when they came in, people were still joiners. So these are two crafts that evolved for different reasons at different times. Joinery, sawn stock. Joinery, wide board. Joinery, woods that you can't rive. Walnut, mahogany.
It means cabinet making.
Cherry. I'm sorry, cabinet making. Thank you very much. Think of all the woods that you see in cabinet making. They don't rive so good. On the other hand, you saw them. Some of them are softer than oak. Not all of them necessarily, but most of them. And when you construct in cabinet making, they tell me, and I'm subject to correction for error, that both sides of your board must be true and parallel. Whereas in here, the insides of this critter, everything just runs free. Some are whacked, some are rived, some are triangular, some are thin, some are wide, because, among other things, you don't have to cut dovetails at corners. So they're two different crafts. This is not a comparison between the crafts, but it's important to, when you try to appreciate joinery, that you realize it stems from another tradition, a tradition which is really based on the nature of oak wood and oak trees. It's based on a tradition where there's much less use of the saw, there's much less interest in the interior of work, almost no consideration of it. And what you're seeing today, therefore, is a totally different craft, no question. And I don't think. Oh, you all done, honey?
Peg holes.
Okay. Let's hear it from Peter. Now.
Don't follow him. Look what happened to me. I was doing it to poor Nathaniel. One of the ways that I sort of mark this piece as done with its mortises is to bore the holes for the wooden pegs. And that way, I don't have to bore 40 holes in a row. I just bore 2 at a time, 4 at a time. And I can then look on the bench and say, oh, that one's all mortised. It's got its peg holes. And that's, my fabrication. I have no basis for that from historical evidence.
Shall we discuss the piercer at this time?
Sure.
Okay, where are a couple blades? This is the classic joiner's boring tool. It is essentially an abrading tool. This is called the piercer, P-I-E-R-C-E-R. Sometimes the whole brace and the bit are called a piercer collectively. As you can see, there are two versions here.
Settle down on the bench, John, so they're just a white background or white background.
Is that Jay Gaynor? Yeah, it is. We got a question for you, Bunky. All right, now. Are those good? As you can see, the one to my right, is a simple flute with a rounded point, not terribly sharp, by the way. And if you're a right-hander and you bore clockwise, the right-hand side of it has a little bit of a bite to it. You just stone it a little bit. The left-hand version is fluted, but it has a lancet point coming up. Can you see the difference? The lancet point is great because it helps you find the point of where you want to bore, but the problem is it's very hard to bore with because you can imagine you'd be pushing that whole cross-section into the wood. Whereas in the simpler piercer, it bores, as you can see, very easily. Now you listen to that sound? Spruck, 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 spruck. Listen to this. Every rotation you get two sprucks. I made the word up. Two sounds.
And you don't get the split out with that drill. I mean, I wouldn't.
I'll show you the back of the hole. These don't look that...
Sprucky?
Well, no, they're not that troublesome right here.
John, is that substantially different than a chairmaker spoon bit?
Cuts the same way.
It cuts the same way, except the spoon bit is rounded, but also will hold water like the lancet point will. But the other piercer is not spoon-shaped, won't hold water. But yes, obviously in their action, they're related to each other. It's a reaming tool. It's not really a cutting tool at all. And the spruck comes from the fact that when the cutting edge comes around and it meets the end grain, spruck, comes around, meets the end grain, spruck, and that's why for each rotation you get spruck, 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 spruck. And if you want to determine that the guy faked a piece of furniture, you look at the peg holes, and maybe we can find some examples later, where you can actually see evidence of the sprucks. And that means at least this faker used period tools.
And we in no way suggest that you fill your spoon bits or piercer bits with water.
Gruel soup, yes.
Does that bring us close, Jay?
That brings us spot on break time. So does that work for you?
That's because I had a good tip. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. What's the rules on break, Jay?
Rules on break. Need to be back here right at 11. We're going to try to get started on time. You're welcome to come up on stage and take a look at the sparking devices. And there's coffee and soft drinks and stuff.
Applaud, Peter.
John?